How are you? I love your shirt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. How are you? Thank you so much for doing this, for agreeing to this interview.
No, thank you so much for having me and for reading the book. I'm really excited.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andre Clark, and I'm representing Caribbean today. Um, Today we have Breanne Mc Ivor. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Beautiful. We have Breanne Mc Ivor, who's an award-winning writer from Trinidad and Tobago. She holds degrees in English from the universities of Cambridge and Edinburgh and has a certificate in Advanced Professional Makeup Artistry. Her short story collection, Where There Are Monsters, was published in 2019. And today I have the extreme honor to talk with her about her debut novel, The God of Good Looks, which was released earlier this summer. I have the book here with this beautiful cover. Everyone can see. Yes. And I know that you have, in previous interviews, gone through great lengths to let everyone know that is not you on the cover.
One of those things that when we were designing the cover, it did not occur to me. It didn't occur to anybody on any team that it could possibly be me. I don't think it looks that much like me. And then when the book came out, everyone was like, "Oh, is that you on the cover?" And the first time I got the question, I was just like, "No, of course not." And then after I got it a few times, I was like, "Do I not know what I look like? Am I missing something?" It's a very artsy cover as well, with flowers like covering her mouth and on her face. So yeah, that was one of the surprises of publication that I got asked so many times. Is that you?
For sure. And like, I don't know if I've ever seen an author that put themselves on the cover. That's a little that's
Yeah,
a, that's a
yeah.
little I don't think you would be that vain. Even though
Yeah, that's more like, like autobiography, like your Prince Harry on the cover of Spare, not like a
right.
novel where you're like, no, I want to put myself front and center in every possible way. No,
I hear
no.
you. I hear you for sure. So, first and foremost, how are you? With the God of Good Looks only being out a few months and being so well received, I'm sure everything has been like a whirlwind since the release.
Yeah, it has been so surreal. I feel like for my whole life, I had this dream, like I want to be a writer. And it's one of those things you never know if it can come true, when it will come true. Even when you're writing, you never know if anybody will care about your book, your characters. And to have all of that happening now, yeah, it's just been a dream come true. Like I wish I could go back in time, when I was working on this book in like the wee hours of the morning, because I had to balance my 9 to 5 and just, daily chores with writing. And it was like 2 o'clock and I knew I'd be like exhausted and work the next day. I wish I can just say to that girl, be like, listen, it's going to get better. Like,
It's gonna work out very well. So for our Caribbean Today viewers who may not be familiar with you, could you please give us a little short introduction and maybe some insight into your background and upbringing?
sure. So I am born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. Growing up, I had a mother who read to me all the time, and I always wanted to be a writer. And I don't actually remember this, but she tells me I couldn't even read, and I would follow her around with books, just reading to her in inverted commas and making up all of these stories. Um, and yeah, my family, like many Caribbean families, is this just crazy mixed family with, people who either came to the Caribbean or were brought to the Caribbean from all different parts of the world. Um, I lived in Trinidad my whole life up until I went away to university when I was 18. And that gave me a whole new perspective, because I think, when you live somewhere your whole life, you take everything about that place for granted. And it was only when I was living first in Cambridge and then in Edinburgh that I realized, hey, all of these things that are just so normal to me, some of them are completely different and abnormal. And yeah, I just had a wonderful time at university, came back to Trinidad when I was done, and I've been back home ever since.
Oh, that's amazing. Was there like what was the cultural diffusion like in Cambridge and Edinburgh? Was there did you encounter a lot of Caribbean people from different islands, or did you kind of feel like, you know, the unicorn in the group?
Very, very few. It's really interesting actually because when I was at Cambridge in my college Girton, I was something called the ethnic minorities rep.
Mm,
And there was this belief in England, in the UK, that like students of color were not applying to Cambridge because they didn't think that they could fit in. And so part of my job was to, interact with students who had great grades and who could get it, and to help them to see that, this is a great place. And so I remember inviting some of the students up, and they came over and they spent time with me with other students. And one of them said, wow, everybody's so nice to you. Like, so many people. And it was so funny because that student, she had been told by her teachers that although she had the grades to go to Cambridge, she would not fit in there and she was discouraged from applying. And that
mm,
was a huge culture shock to me because I think growing up in Trinidad, where the vast majority of the country is people of color, I had never thought, oh, I'm not going to apply to Cambridge because I'm a woman of color. Now, I had thought I mightn't get in because it's competitive, but
mm,
I think that that was a huge sort of cultural realization for me. And I ended up talking to a lot of my friends from Trinidad who went away, and they encountered something very similar. And we talked about, there's a sense that we actually are kind of fortunate that we never had to go through this whole, oh, I wouldn't be allowed in this space because of my race, that a lot of people like in the UK and some of my friends in the US, some of those experiences that they had. um and so I guess that was the positive. I think
mhm,
one of the things I realized was negative was just how used I was to crime. I sort of grew up in a country where the crime rate was getting worse and worse. I think
mhm.
now Trinidad has the sixth highest crime rate per capita in the world.
Wow.
And I remember the first time I stayed with a friend, being in her house, and I was just like, aren't you gonna put the alarm on? Like, where's the burglar proof? And then she's like, what is wrong with you? Like, we don't need that. And it boggled my mind. Like, it literally took me a while to be okay with windows without all of those bars going across, because I was just like, what if someone comes in? And everyone's like, what? No one's gonna come in. So it was a huge, I think, culture shock in good and bad ways. But no, I did not encounter a lot of Caribbean people. I think when I did though, there was always this immediate connection, like because they would hear the accent and they would place it right away. I would place their accent. And yeah, it was, I think it also helped me to think of myself more as a Caribbean person and less of a Trinidadian, because when you're
Mm,
in the Caribbean, you're Trinidadian and then somebody else is, Jamaican, Grenadian, but like in sort of like the vastness of another country, anybody from the Caribbean, you're just like, hey, nice to see you.
right. That makes total sense, you know, and I think that's an amazing program that they had at Cambridge. And representation really matters, you know, like seeing all you need is to see one person in that position, and it totally changes how you feel about your opportunities and the things that you can accomplish in those spaces. So I think that's really great. So just to get into a little bit about the plot, we meet Bianca Bridge, a 24-year-old aspiring novelist, who wants to write a novel based on her mother's life. And um, she she goes away to university in the UK, comes back, meets a lovely man at a cafe who also likes to read like her, and she ends up having an affair with a government official, a married government official. They get caught, and he gets to resume his career, and she's basically a pariah in Trinidad. And she models and writes, but she gets fired from her writing job. So she models to make ends meet. And eventually she meets the god of good looks, Obadiah, a makeup guru in Trinidad. And he gives her a job to work on, to be his assistant, and also work on his would you say like it's a literary magazine or a
Fashion magazine,
fashion
his
magazine that is a part of his brand. So we know that Bianca is not an autobiographical character. She's not you, but you have, as you've explained previously, she is like, a lot of her life is inspired by your own real life experiences. And you just detailed a great example regarding makeup, but can you speak more to the modeling aspect, working for mass camps, modeling for mass camps? Because the book went into such great detail about photography, about the modeling, about the different characters that you meet in that world, how seedy it can get. And it feels like, I know you've probably done a ton of research, but it also feels very natural and very real, like someone who's really been in that experience, kind of explaining, what happens.
Yeah, well, first of all, that was a brilliant summary. Like, there are times when people ask me to summarize the book, and after all this time, I take a moment and I go, where should I start? That was amazing.
Oh, appreciate it. I could just take out all the ahs and the ums, but thank you. I appreciate it.
And yeah, so I think both Bianca and Obadiah were inspired by aspects of my life, but I never write a character wholesale into a book based on either myself or someone I know well. So it's not that I can ever point a character and say, oh, she's me, or this is my father, or anything like that. But there have been experiences in my life that just naturally have fed into Bianca's experiences. So I have had like experience modeling, not anything like Bianca's experience modeling. But I have sometimes been in those situations where you're doing an ad around Carnival time as well in Trinidad. That is the time when people are looking for models,
Mm.
because like Carnival season, the build up, when the different mass camps release their costumes, like there are people who, they're looking to see which band are they going to play with, like which costume is the best. There's certain sections they're going to sell out really quickly. You have to, get in there, get your costume. It's a huge season, and that, if you are modeling, like that's the time when you would have a lot of work. And it's so fascinating because the origin of Carnival in Trinidad, Carnival came from um, the plantations and from slaves' resistance to sort of their personhood being taken away. And it was always about this sort of like riot and rebellion and personhood. And that element still exists, but it's now also become just about beauty and, do you have the hot body? And
Mhm.
you,
Skimpy outfit.
yeah, I mean, I'm on the mailing list for my dermatologist, and around Carnival time, the things you get about, the full body wax, the cellulite removal, it's something that you hear from all sides if you are even just a regular person who's thinking of playing mass. And sometimes, you will get comments, like you will hear people say very casually, oh, I need to get my body in the right condition to play mass. This idea that, you can't just go on the road as you are. You need to, there's this belief that you need to work for it. And I think that it's even worse in the modeling world, because when you're modeling, you are supposed to be selling this costume. Every band is competing against all others. And I just think that naturally in that space, there's going to be so much body negativity. There's going to be so much judgment. And there are spaces for people who have, like in many industries, people who have not even a lot of power, but more power than the models, to push against boundaries of what would normally be acceptable. Because there's this thing we do where you see a woman in a carnival costume, a modern carnival costume might be like, you know, a bikini with beads, sometimes a thong bottom, and you just think, oh, you know, gosh, you know, she's not somebody deserving of respect. Look at how she's dressed. Look at how she behaves. You know, you sometimes you're treated so differently when you're dressed like that in a modeling context versus if you had been encountered maybe that same person in a suit. And so I think that my limited experiences had me thinking a lot about respectability politics. And then my friends' experiences and my own had me thinking so much about body image and the way that, you know, we have just sort of imbibed this belief that you need to look a certain way to play mass. A friend of mine, she actually had an experience where she wanted to play mass in a particular section, not model. She wanted to pay money for the costume. And they asked her to send her a picture of them, both her face and her body, because they wanted to maintain a certain image in that section. And I'm like, wait, that is out of control. And I know that like while the carnival experience might be specific to countries that have this big build up to carnival, the experience of feeling so judged in your own body and feeling so uncomfortable with your own body, that's something that so many people go through from all cultures. So I I did bring some of my own experience, and I think it just combined with the knowledge of what so many people, especially so many women, go through, the sense of, you know, you're never good enough. You need to work on this laundry list of things to be considered attractive. And I think that, you know, Bianca, she struggles a lot with that over the course of the book. You know, what should her relationship be with her own body, with makeup, with the clothes she wears, and it's difficult. It's difficult to answer. It's not a book that I think answers those questions. You're not gonna end saying, "Oh, I've figured it out." But I think that even her struggles, you know, hopefully raise important questions. Hopefully.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think the fact that it's told from her perspective as someone who gets the attention that so many other women kind of ascribe to, and to hear her thoughts about, you know, having to maintain this body, having to maintain this image, dealing with these men who expect these things is really refreshing, and I think really effective in showing that even the beautiful women, even the ones that have that stereotypical beauty, struggle, you know, and don't always want to be that person, but realizes that they have to be in order to kind of, you know, survive in that world. So I think it definitely accomplished what it needed to, for sure.
Thank you. And yeah, I think sort of along those lines, I also wanted to discuss the extent to which people who might not fall into the category of stereotypical beauty. So there's a character, might be a spoiler, so I won't say who, but there's a character who appears to fall into that category, but a lot of it is illusion. And the pressure that those of us feel to ascribe to this very narrow, often very Eurocentric idea of beauty. And when we don't meet it, you know, sometimes there's this use of makeup as like a mask, you know, and the sense of the you know what it is to be beautiful in the conventional traditional sense is so narrow, and yet people might be aware of that. They might be aware of how messed up it is, but they might still have this sense of, yeah, but I still want to look that way, you know.
For sure. Um, so I want to, so I'm personally, I'm a MFA student in my first semester. So I wanted to slip a craft question in there for you, if you don't mind. So one of my favorite authors, Claire Keegan, she said in an interview that as a writer, she's always looking for a character that's genuinely ailing or finding it difficult to cope, someone who's out in the deep water. is that similar to your philosophy when you're trying to develop your characters, or at least for this book? Because it feels like a lot of the people that we meet in The God of Good Looks, especially Bianca and Obadiah, they feel like they're out there in the deep water as they, navigate their life and try to figure out what success looks like for them.
So, well, first of all, good luck in your MFA. I'm sure that is both exciting and crazy challenging.
Very.
Uh,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
and yes, so I once attended a writing workshop with Marlon James. He was in Trinidad. It was just after he won the Booker Prize. Um, and of course, like this thing was oversubscribed. So we're all there, and he gave me a piece of advice that's actually really similar to what Claire Keegan said. He said, don't be afraid to give your characters nothing.
Mm.
He said, sometimes as authors, we want to coddle our characters. We want to say, okay, like, let me take care of you almost. But don't be afraid to push past that and to say, okay, what if, there was nothing going for them? How can they respond, and what would that tell us about their personalities? And I really took that to heart. I think at the beginning, Bianca, part of what this book does is Bianca has this affair with Eric, and she is somebody who is often the object of scorn. Like in Trinidad, we would say, the outside woman or the corner woman. And this is often the figure who is the villain. This is the woman who is on the outside, but it's told from her perspective. And I had to say, okay, why would she want to be with Eric? What is it that she gets from Eric? And in order for her, I felt, to really seriously want to be with him so badly, and for him to give her so much, she couldn't have a lot in her life. She couldn't have, a wonderful supportive family and a great friend group. And, because then the appeal of Eric would not have been the same. And Eric had this sort of opportunism for vulnerability, where he realized how vulnerable she was and he was able to exploit that. So I think that for Bianca, I knew, okay, she can't have a lot in her life. And that also, to me, raised really interesting questions about, okay, well, how will she respond to this as well? How will she respond to really the only good thing since she came back to Trinidad in her mind was Eric, and now he's not there? How will she respond to being the object of scorn, not having a job, not having a good relationship with her father, sort of clinging to modeling as her only form of income, despite the fact that that career is so fraught with issues? And so I wanted her to be in that situation. And then Obadiah, he, again, is somebody who, he has his business, but then the rest of his life is a complete shambles. And I think for the story I wanted to write was both of them helping and saving each other. I definitely didn't want it to be a story of Obadiah saving Bianca, but at the same time, he does give her so much, and he gives her a new lens to interpret different things. So I do think that that is great advice. Both the sort of Claire Keegan, Marlon James, both in terms of you learning more about your characters, because sometimes the characters surprise you think and you're writing, and then you read it over and you're like, but also I think that sometimes as an author, you're going to have to be ruthless in certain situations. You can't always think of your characters like your friends, where you want everything always to work out. And if you can embrace that mindset of even if you know that you're planning a happy ending, but the character has to have this dark night of the soul somewhere in there, I do think that's a good mindset to have.
Amazing. So I know we only have a few more minutes. So I will ask maybe like two more questions. One of the parts of the book that I really enjoyed was the depictions of Trinidad, both the good and the bad. So The God of Good Looks spans the history, culture, and current societal ills of Trinidad and Tobago through the use of beauty and literary industries, especially those newspapers. Every time there was a newspaper, I said, "Oh man, what, what these people did now." So how important was it to you to depict the beautiful parts of Trinidad and the not so beautiful parts, like the gender inequality, sexism, poverty, and rampant crime, which is also something that I think you masterfully did in Where There Are Monsters, um, which was kind of like the main part of Where There Are Monsters, but you know, you weaved it in very, very beautifully into this book. So like how can you speak more to like how important it was to really show a complete image of Trinidad and not just, you know, the destination vacation and the beach and the sand and the sun and the carnival? What Yeah, can you speak more to that?
That's a great question. And thank you so much.
No
So
problem.
I think that actually I'll start touching on something we talked about earlier, which is when I started living abroad, I think that that was the first time that I really encountered the Caribbean stereotypes in a much more real way. I mean, yeah, you know, like if there's a movie and it's set in the Caribbean, there's instantly going to be a steel pan playing, a beach, a palm tree, rum. You know what it is. But I think that I just figured, yeah, okay, well, that's just, a movie setting the scene. They have those stereotypes for everywhere. But I would, meet and talk to people, and they would have all of these assumptions about the Caribbean. And I think that, like any place, stereotypes, there is an element of truth, but it's not the whole story. But I think that when you compare the Caribbean to other more well-known countries, so you think of a country like the US, whether you've been to America or not, you have a working knowledge of the US. I know what it means if you're from the North or the South. I know like East Coast, West Coast. I have an idea of those things. Whereas, the Caribbean in general, Trinidad, it's just this sort of very vague kind of like beach, rum. And I wanted to show the different sides of it because I feel it's not something that I read about a lot. And I feel like growing up in the modern Caribbean, I remember one time I was in the US on some sort of book event, and I was telling somebody a story about the first time I got recognized as an author. And I said, yeah, somebody came up to me in Starbucks, and the point of the story was that this person comes up to me in Starbucks and she's like, hey, are you Breanne Mc Ivor? And I was just like, where do I know you from? And then she's like, I love your book. I was so excited. And she's like, but also like you look so much better in person than your author photo. Your author photo is terrible. And I went just like from up to down. I was like, what? And I always tell that story. It gets a kind of groan laugh. And I'm telling it in the US. And when I get to the end, somebody's like, hang on, you have a Starbucks in Trinidad? And I
Wow.
remember just being like, I mean, it's not the point. Yeah, sure, we do. We have many and many other coffee shops. And so I think that part of what I hope is that this book can be a small part of showing, what the modern Caribbean is. And I think to me that is the good and the bad. Like I personally know what it's like to live in a country, like when you talk about those newspaper headlines, like there are times where I will unfollow the news on social media because I'm like, I can't with the constant, like murders, rape, like just today before I came on, I checked X, Twitter. And they were just like, yeah, 600 and something murders for the year, 16% detection rate, and I did want to show the negative side of it too. I wanted to just show a complete picture of Trinidad. And it was really important to me because one thing that happened when I was looking for an agent is that there was one agent who actually felt that like, look, what we need to do in this book is we need to lean into um the sun, sea, and sand version of the Caribbean, because that's going to be the most recognizable version of the Caribbean. And this crime stuff that has to go. That like you're writing for an international audience. I mean, and in the end, we ended up not working together. And I do think that an agent's job is to sell a book, and that was their vision of how this book would sell. But I think that experiences like that in the end made me want to do it more, because I want to be like, no, like we, just like everybody, deserves like this sort of nuanced portrayal of where we live and who we are. And I think that um the fact that I still live in Trinidad now, that I was writing this book, and sometimes things would happen like in the news, and I'd be like, okay, the tiny ray of sunlight to this terrible newspaper headline is, I'm going to fictionalize it and put it in the book. It was really important to me to portray it. And I think that I had once gone to a book club, and somebody in that book club said to me that she had never read a book. She was a Trinidadian. She had never read a book about her experience in Trinidad, who lived experience, until she read something that I wrote. And that's something that I just carry with me always as like one of the best pieces of feedback for somebody to feel that way.
Beautiful. And I could imagine, because, as much as being an author is a occupation and you want to be successful and make money, I don't think writers write just to make money. Like, it's not like, hey, I know how I'm going to be rich, let me write a book. You want to touch people. You want to really kind of have an exchange of energy with the readers and impart something on them. So I'm sure that feedback was everything for you. So all right, I do have one more question. Do you have any upcoming projects that you can give us a little hint about, or another novel, anything else coming up that we can look out for?
I am working on what I hope will be my next novel. I will say that for me, my first draft is always like a disaster zone. I think that's one of the things that I had to accept about my process. There's some people who they turn out a really good first draft. I think I read somewhere that Arthur Miller wrote Death of a Salesman in like 3 weeks or 6 weeks. And I was like, is this man, what? That's not me. And so like part of what I have to accept about my process is that my final draft may look very different from the first draft. So I almost like, I'm not 100% sure, but I am working on what I hope will be another novel. And I have just accepted the tragicness of, like, I read parts over and I'll just be like, that can't stay in as it is. I'll just highlight it all in yellow and I'll just move on, and I'll know like I'm coming back to this. But yeah, hopefully another one coming.
Amazing. So we'll be on the lookout for that. Right now, Got a Good Looks in hardcover. Where can people purchase the book at the moment?
Hopefully anywhere books are sold. It's on like Kindle, on Audible, Amazon. I have to make a plug for if you have a favorite indie bookstore. So yeah.
Yes, support indie bookstores first. Before you go to Barnes and Noble, look for that indie bookstore. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about your career, about your work, about upcoming work. I really enjoyed this conversation. And, representing Caribbean Today, we really do wish you continued commercial success and can't wait to see what you release next.
Thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to you. You're a great interviewer.